The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands as my car careened toward the oak tree, brakes completely dead, and in that terrifying moment, I knew my own daughter had just tried to kill me. The impact threw me forward, airbag exploding in my face like a cruel slap from fate itself. When the world stopped spinning, I sat there bleeding from my forehead, thinking not about my injuries, but about the conversation I'd had with Rachel just 12 hours earlier. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I should probably start from the beginning, though the beginning feels like a lifetime ago now. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie, and at 67 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. It started 3 weeks ago when my husband Robert passed away after 43 years of marriage. Lung cancer, quick and merciless, the kind that takes a good man before he's ready to go. Robert had been an investment banker, quiet and methodical about money, the type who read financial reports like bedtime stories. I knew he'd been successful, but I'd never paid much attention to the specific numbers. That was his domain, not mine. The day after the funeral, Rachel showed up at my house with her husband Brad and their 16-year-old son Tyler. I was still in my black dress, still feeling hollowed out by grief, when she walked into my kitchen like she owned the place. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," she said, not even bothering with condolences or asking how I was holding up. "Rachel, honey, can't this wait? Your father's barely been gone 72 hours. "The lawyer called," Brad interrupted, his voice sharp with excitement. "There's more money than we thought, a lot more." I stared at them, these two people I'd raised and welcomed into my family, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Rachel pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Dad was worth $30 million. Mom, $30 million. And according to this, it's all going to you." The number hit me like a physical blow. $30 million. Robert and I had lived comfortably, sure, but I'd had no idea we were that wealthy. He'd always been modest about money, driving the same car for 10 years, clipping coupons, insisting we didn't need a bigger house. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It's not impossible, it's just unfair," Rachel snapped. "You're 67 years old, Mom. What are you going to do with $30 million? Buy a yacht? Take cruises around the world? Meanwhile, Brad and I are drowning in debt. Tyler needs college money, and we're about to lose our house." I looked at my grandson, who was staring at his phone, deliberately avoiding eye contact. This conversation was clearly planned, rehearsed, and he wanted no part of it. "Rachel, I just learned about this money 5 minutes ago. Can we please discuss this rationally?" "There's nothing to discuss," Brad said, leaning forward with that aggressive posture he used when he wanted something. "You don't need $30 million. Nobody your age needs that kind of money. The responsible thing would be to distribute it now while we can all benefit from it." "The responsible thing," I repeated slowly, tasting the manipulation in those words. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Rachel reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. "Transfer the inheritance to us. We'll take care of everything, Mom. You'll never have to worry about money or investments or any of that complicated stuff. We'll make sure you're comfortable for the rest of your life, the rest of my life." As if I were already dying, already irrelevant, already a burden to be managed rather than a person with her own wishes and dreams. "I need time to think about this," I said firmly. Rachel's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something ugly flash across her face. "Time to think? Mom, this is family. We're not asking you to think. We're asking you to do the right thing." But what Rachel didn't know was that 36 hours later, I'd be sitting in a wrecked car, wondering if doing the right thing was going to get me killed. The morning after Rachel's visit, I sat in my lawyer's office trying to process the reality of Robert's fortune. Harold Brennan had been our attorney for 20 years, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes who'd handled our wills, our house purchases, all the mundane legal business of a long marriage. "Your husband was very specific about his intentions, Maggie," Harold said, sliding a copy of the will across his desk. "Everything goes to you, with clear instructions that you should use the money however you see fit. He didn't want anyone else making decisions about your financial future." I ran my finger along Robert's signature, remembering how carefully he'd always signed important documents. Harold, I had no idea we had this much money. Robert was an exceptional investor. He also inherited a significant amount from his father's real estate business, money he invested wisely over the decades. The bulk of it came from a software company he bought stock in back in the 80s. Nobody expected it to become what it became. Microsoft. My husband had been quietly holding Microsoft stock for 40 years. Did Rachel know about this? I asked. Harold's expression darkened slightly. She's called my office 6 times in the past week, demanding details about the estate. I've told her repeatedly that I can only discuss this with you, but she's been quite persistent. Persistent, that was a polite way of putting it. That was a polite. Rachel had always been determined, even as a child, but somewhere along the way, that determination had twisted into something more demanding, more entitled. She wants me to transfer the money to her and Brad, I said. That's your decision to make, Maggie. But I feel obligated to mention that your husband specifically included a clause in his will. Harold flipped to the second page. If you choose to give away more than half the inheritance within the first year, the remainder goes to the American Cancer Society. Robert was very clear about this. He wanted to make sure you kept enough to live comfortably, regardless of family pressure. Family pressure. Robert had known. Somehow, he'd anticipated exactly what would happen after he died. I drove home slowly, thinking about the man I'd been married to for 4 decades. Robert had never been dramatic or confrontational, but he'd always been observant. He'd watched Rachel's marriage deteriorate over the years, watched Brad's business failures pile up, watched the way they looked at our house and cars and lifestyle with increasing resentment. He'd protected me even after death. My phone was ringing as I walked through the front door. Rachel, of course. Mom, Brad and I have been talking all night. We've come up with a plan that works for everyone. Rachel, I haven't even had time to process. We'll take $25 million, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. That leaves you $5 million, which is more than enough for your needs. You can stay in the house, keep your car, live exactly like you have been. And we'll handle all the investment decisions so you don't have to worry about managing that much money. $5 million. She was offering to let me keep 1/6 of my own inheritance, like it was an act of generosity. And if I say no? I asked. The silence stretched too long. Why would you say no, Mom? We're family. Family takes care of family. Your father worked his entire life to build this nest egg, Rachel. He left it to me because he trusted me to make good decisions with it. Dad also didn't expect to die at 69, Rachel shot back. If he'd lived another 20 years, there wouldn't be anything left anyway. You'd have spent it on medical bills and nursing homes and all the expensive things that come with getting old. Getting old. As if aging were a moral failing, something selfish I was doing to inconvenience her. I'm not giving you $25 million. Rachel, $10 million then. Mom, be reasonable. Brad's business is failing. We're behind on our mortgage. Tyler needs college money. We're drowning here while you're sitting on more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. I said no. The silence this time felt different. Colder. You're making a mistake. Mom, a big mistake. Family is all you have left now that Dad's gone. You might want to think about what happens to old women who isolate themselves from the people who love them. She hung up before I could respond, but her words echoed in my mind for hours afterward. Old women who isolate themselves. It sounded almost like a threat, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my daughter, not some stranger. Rachel was angry and desperate, but she wouldn't actually hurt me. Would she? 3 days later, I made my position crystal clear. Rachel and Brad came over for what they called a family meeting, though it felt more like an intervention designed to wear down my resistance. Mom, we've talked to Tyler about this, Rachel started, using our grandson as emotional leverage. He's worried about you living alone in this big house with all this money. What if someone breaks in? What if something happens to you? What if you fall and there's no one here to help? Brad added. At your age, a simple accident could be fatal. My age again. They kept talking about my 67 years like I was already decrepit, already incompetent, already halfway to the grave. I appreciate your concern, I said dryly, but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Are you, though? Rachel leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. When's the last time you balanced a checkbook? Do you even know how to log into Dad's investment accounts? This much money requires professional management, Mom. It's not something you can just figure out on your own. I ran a bookkeeping business for 15 years before I married your father, I reminded her. I think I can handle my own finances. That was 30 years ago. Things have changed. Everything's online now. Everything's complicated. You'll make mistakes, lose money, get taken advantage of by financial advisors who see an elderly widow as an easy target. Elderly widow. Another charming phrase designed to make me feel helpless. The answer is still no, I said firmly. Brad's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish and stubborn, and you're going to regret it. Excuse me? You heard me. You're acting like a spoiled child who won't share her toys. That money could change our lives, could secure Tyler's future, could solve all our problems. But instead, you want to hoard it like some miser. I stood up, my temper finally overriding my shock. Get out of my house. Mom, wait. Rachel tried to interject, but I was done being polite. Get out, both of you, and don't come back until you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve. They left in a fury of slammed doors and screeching tires. I stood at my living room window, watching their car disappear down my street, and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd finally stood up for myself. Sadness because I'd just burned bridges with my only child. But I'd made the right decision. Robert had left that money to me, not to Rachel and Brad. If they wanted financial security, they could work for it the same way Robert and I had. The next morning, I woke up to find my morning newspaper missing from the driveway. A small thing, but strange. I'd been getting the same paper delivered for 12 years, and it had never been late or misdelivered. The day after that, my mailbox was knocked over. The mail carrier said it looked like someone had hit it with a baseball bat, though no one had seen anything. On Thursday, I came home from grocery shopping to find my garbage cans scattered across the lawn, trash everywhere, as if someone had deliberately kicked them over. Small incidents, petty vandalism, the kind of thing teenagers might do on a dare. But the timing felt deliberate, calculated to make me feel unsafe in my own home. I didn't call Rachel to complain. I didn't call the police either, though I probably should have. Instead, I cleaned up the messes and told myself I was imagining patterns where none existed. But on Friday morning, when I went to start my car and the engine made a grinding sound it had never made before, I finally admitted what I'd been trying not to think. Someone was sending me a message, and that someone wanted me to understand exactly how vulnerable I was. Living alone in a big house with $30 million and no protection except the locks on my doors. The question was, how far were they willing to go to make their point? I was about to find out. Saturday morning, I had an appointment with my financial advisor downtown. Simple enough. A 20-minute drive through familiar neighborhoods to discuss how to invest Robert's inheritance responsibly. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the years, always feeling safe in my reliable Honda Civic. I should have known something was wrong when the brake pedal felt spongy as I backed out of my driveway. But I'd been distracted, thinking about the meeting ahead, mentally rehearsing questions about mutual funds and retirement planning. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that usually lifted my spirits. The first real sign of trouble came when I reached the stop sign at the end of my street. I pressed the brake pedal, and it went halfway to the floor before the car reluctantly slowed. Strange, but not alarming enough to turn around. I told myself it was probably just morning condensation on the brake pads, something that would work itself out after a few more stops. By the time I reached the main road, I knew I was in serious trouble. The pedal was going all the way to the floor now, and the car was barely slowing down. My heart started racing as I pumped the brakes frantically, feeling nothing but empty resistance. I was doing 45 miles per hour down a busy street with no way to stop. The intersection ahead had a red light. Cars were crossing from both directions, and I was approaching fast with no way to slow down. I laid on the horn and swerved into the left turn lane, missing a blue sedan by inches. The driver honked angrily, having no idea he'd just witnessed an attempted murder, because by then, I was certain that's what this was. The brake line hadn't failed naturally. Someone had cut it, someone had sabotaged my car, someone had sent me out this morning expecting me to die in a fiery crash that would look like nothing more than a tragic accident. The oak tree came into view as I crested the hill doing 50 miles per hour. A massive old tree, probably 100 years old, standing alone in a small park on the right side of the road. In that split second, I had a choice. Try to make the curve ahead and risk hitting other cars, or aim for the tree and hope the impact wouldn't kill me. I chose the tree. The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands as my car careened toward the oak, brakes completely dead, and in that terrifying moment, I knew my own daughter had just tried to kill me. The impact was tremendous. The airbag exploded in my face like a fist, and the sound of crumpling metal filled the air. My seatbelt cut into my chest as the car folded around the ancient trunk. For a moment, everything went white and silent. When my vision cleared, I was slumped forward against the deflated airbag, blood trickling from a cut on my forehead. My chest ached, my hands were shaking, but I was alive. Miraculously, impossibly alive. People were running toward the car, shouting questions, calling 911. A young man with kind eyes pried open my driver's door and knelt beside me. "Ma'am, don't move. The ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." But as I sat there waiting for help, one thought kept cycling through my mind. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill me for $30 million, and they'd failed, which meant they'd probably try again. And I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking my pulse, shining lights in my eyes, asking standard questions about pain and dizziness. I answered honestly. I was hurt, but not seriously injured, shaken, but coherent. "You're very lucky," the lead paramedic said, as they loaded me into the ambulance. "Cars don't usually survive impacts like that. That tree probably saved your life by stopping you before you could hit something worse." Lucky. If only he knew how unlucky I'd really been. At the hospital, while doctors stitched up my forehead and x-rayed my ribs, I had time to think. Someone had sabotaged my car, counting on me to die in the crash. If I had died, Rachel would have inherited everything. There wouldn't have been time for the 1-year clause in Robert's will to take effect. But I was alive, and now I knew exactly what my loving daughter was capable of. The question was, what was I going to do about it? They released me from the hospital that evening with a concussion, 3 stitched-up cuts, and bruised ribs that would ache for weeks. Rachel showed up just as I was being discharged, playing the role of the concerned daughter with Oscar-worthy dedication. "Oh, Mom, thank God you're okay," she said, rushing to embrace me. When the hospital called, I was terrified. I got here as fast as I could. The hospital called her. Interesting. I was listed as single on all my medical forms. Robert's death had changed that status, which meant Rachel was no longer my emergency contact. Yet somehow she'd been notified within hours of my accident. "How did you know I was here?" I asked carefully. "Tyler saw it on social media. Someone posted a video of your car wrapped around that tree. We've been worried sick." A video. Of course. In today's world, every tragedy becomes entertainment for strangers with smartphones. "The important thing is that you're safe," Brad said, appearing beside her with flowers that looked like they'd come from the hospital gift shop. "Though this really makes us think about what we discussed the other day. You're not getting any younger, Maggie, and accidents like this are going to become more common. More common." As if brake failure was a natural consequence of aging, rather than deliberate sabotage. "The police officer said it looked like brake failure," Rachel continued. "Probably just wear and tear on an older car. These things happen. But I'd had my car serviced 2 months ago. The mechanic had specifically checked the brakes and pronounced them in excellent condition. Brake lines don't just spontaneously fail on well-maintained vehicles. I suppose you'll want to stay with us while you recover," Rachel said. "You shouldn't be alone right now, not with a concussion. What if you fall? What if something happens during the night?" The offer sounded generous, caring, exactly what a loving daughter should suggest. But all I could think about was how convenient it would be for them to have me under their roof, vulnerable and isolated from anyone who might ask difficult questions. "Thank you, but I'll be fine at home," I said firmly. "Mom, be reasonable. You can barely walk without wincing. You need someone to take care of you." I said I'll be fine. Rachel's mask slipped slightly, just enough for me to see the frustration underneath. She'd orchestrated this whole scenario, the brake failure, the near-fatal accident, the hospital stay, all to position herself as my rescuer, the devoted daughter taking care of her helpless mother. My refusal to cooperate was ruining her script. "Well, at least let us drive you home," Brad said. Your car is totaled, and you're in no condition to call a taxi. I agreed to the ride because I didn't have much choice, but I sat in their back seat, studying their faces in the rearview mirror, watching for tells, for signs of guilt or nervousness. Rachel chattered nervously about physical therapy and home health aides. Brad kept glancing at me in the mirror, his expression unreadable. When we reached my house, they insisted on coming inside, checking the locks, making sure I had everything I needed. Their concern felt suffocating, performative, like actors overplaying their roles. "Promise you'll call if you need anything," Rachel said, as they finally prepared to leave. "Anything at all, Mom. We're here for you." After they left, I sat in my living room with the lights off, thinking someone had tried to kill me today, and that someone was almost certainly my own daughter. The realization should have destroyed me, should have sent me into a spiral of grief and disbelief. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: clarity. If Rachel was willing to commit murder for $30 million, she wasn't going to stop just because the first attempt had failed. She'd try again, probably soon, and next time she might succeed. Unless I stopped her first. But to stop her, I'd need proof. Something more concrete than suspicions and coincidences. I'd need evidence that would hold up in court, evidence that would expose her for what she really was. Monday morning, I called a security company and had cameras installed throughout my house. Tiny, wireless cameras that could record everything and upload the footage to a cloud server. The technician, a young woman named Sarah, was professional and discreet. "Are you concerned about break-ins?" she asked, as she positioned a camera near my front door. "I'm concerned about people who might want to hurt me," I said honestly. She paused in her work, studying my bruised face and bandaged forehead. "These cameras will record everything. Motion-activated, high-definition, night vision capability. If someone tries something, we'll catch it." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." The cameras had been recording for exactly 4 days when they captured something that made my blood run cold. I was reviewing the footage on my laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of empty rooms and routine activities, when I spotted movement in my kitchen at 2:17 a.m. Rachel had a key to my house. I'd given it to her years ago for emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. This was reconnaissance. She moved through my kitchen like a ghost, opening cabinets, checking my prescription bottles, examining the contents of my refrigerator. She wasn't stealing anything, just gathering information. After 10 minutes, she moved to my home office, where she photographed documents on my desk with her phone. But the most chilling part came when she walked into my bedroom, where I lay sleeping just 15 feet away from where she stood. The infrared camera captured her clearly as she watched me for nearly a minute, her expression cold and calculating. She was studying me like a problem to be solved. Then she left as quietly as she'd come. The next night's footage was even worse. This time, Brad was with her. They came prepared with latex gloves and small tools, and they spent an hour systematically searching my house. They found my emergency cash stash in the bedroom drawer. They photographed my social security card and birth certificate. They even took pictures of my medication bottles, probably researching what would happen if I suddenly took too many pills. But the conversation I overheard through the camera's audio feed was what convinced me I was dealing with people who had already crossed a line from which there was no return. "The break thing didn't work," Brad whispered as they rifled through my desk. "She's tougher than we thought." "Or luckier," Rachel replied. "But luck runs out, especially for old women living alone." "What's plan B?" Rachel held up one of my prescription bottles, blood pressure medication that I took daily. Heart attack. Completely believable at her age, especially after a traumatic accident. A little extra potassium in her system, and it'll look like natural causes. How much extra potassium? Enough to stop her heart, but not enough to show up in a basic autopsy. I've been researching it online. The key is to make it look like she just got confused about her dosages, maybe took too many pills by accident, or mixed medications she shouldn't have mixed. My hands shook as I watched my daughter plan my murder with the casual efficiency of someone discussing a grocery list. This wasn't a moment of desperation or anger. This was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded planning. "When?" Brad asked. "Soon. The longer we wait, the more suspicious it becomes. And I don't like how she's been acting lately. Too alert, too independent. It's like she suspects something. They spent another 20 minutes in my house, photographing papers, memorizing my routines, planning my death. When they finally left, I sat in the dark for hours, struggling to accept what I'd just witnessed. My daughter wanted to kill me. Not in a moment of rage, not in self-defense, not even in desperation. She wanted to murder me methodically and deliberately for money. But I had something she didn't know about. Evidence. Hours of high-definition video footage showing her breaking into my home, discussing murder methods, planning to poison me with my own medication. It was enough to send her to prison for a very long time. The question now was when and how to spring the trap. Because Rachel was right about one thing. Time was running out. If I waited too long, I might not survive to see justice served. But I'd learned something important about myself in these past few weeks. I was tougher than anyone thought, tougher than Rachel expected, tougher than Brad anticipated, and maybe even tougher than I'd realized. I'd survived one murder attempt already. Now it was time to make sure there wouldn't be a second one. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and my dear daughter was in for the surprise of her life. The next morning, I called Detective Maria Santos at the county sheriff's office. I'd met her 2 years earlier when our neighborhood had a string of break-ins, and she'd impressed me with her thoroughness and intelligence. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be her. "Mrs. Sullivan, I remember you," she said when I identified myself. "How can I help you today?" "I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My daughter and her husband are planning to kill me for my inheritance." There was a brief pause. "Ma'am, those are serious accusations. Can you come in and file a formal report?" "I have video evidence," I continued. "Multiple recordings of them breaking into my house, discussing murder methods, and planning to poison me with my own medication." The pause was longer this time. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm going to need you to come in immediately and bring those recordings with you." An hour later, I sat in Detective Santos's office, watching her face change as she reviewed the camera footage on my laptop. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute, and by the time she'd seen Rachel and Brad's midnight planning session, she was practically radiating anger. "This is unbelievable," she said, pausing the video at a particularly damaging moment where Rachel was explaining how much potassium it would take to trigger a fatal heart attack. "Your own daughter. I know it's hard to believe." "Oh, I believe it," Detective Santos interrupted. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Mrs. Sullivan. I've seen children kill their parents for a lot less than $30 million. What I can't believe is how casually they're discussing it, like they're planning a dinner party." She leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do about it? We have enough evidence here to arrest them both on conspiracy charges, but if we move too quickly, they might claim it was all just talk, that they never intended to follow through. What are you suggesting?" "We let them try." Her eyes were hard as flint. "We set up surveillance. We wire you with recording equipment, and we let them make their move. When they actually attempt to poison you, we'll have them dead to rights on attempted murder charges." The thought of deliberately putting myself in danger, of allowing Rachel to think she was succeeding in killing me, made my stomach turn. But Detective Santos was right. Conspiracy to commit murder was one thing, but attempted murder carried a much longer prison sentence. "How do we keep me safe while they're trying to kill me?" "We'll have officers positioned around your house, medical personnel standing by, and you'll be wearing a wire that will monitor constantly. The moment they make their move, we'll intervene." I thought about Robert, about the life we'd built together, about the daughter I'd raised who was now plotting my death. He would have wanted justice. He would have wanted Rachel to face consequences for her choices. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Detective Santos smiled grimly. "Good. Because frankly, Mrs. Sullivan, people like your daughter don't stop until someone stops them. This might be your only chance to make sure you live to enjoy that inheritance your husband left you." We spent the next 2 hours planning the operation. I would continue my normal routine, acting as if I suspected nothing. When Rachel and Brad made their move, I'd wear a wire and pretend to be their victim. The police would be watching everything, ready to move the instant my life was in real danger. "One more thing," Detective Santos said as I prepared to leave. "Whatever happens, don't try to be a hero. These people have already shown they're willing to commit murder. If something goes wrong, if you feel like you're in genuine danger, just say the code word butterfly and we'll come in immediately. Butterfly. Such a delicate word for such a deadly situation. But as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. A sense of purpose. Rachel thought she was hunting a helpless old woman. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that would destroy her life as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Let the games begin. Rachel called the next evening, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. Mom, I've been thinking about what happened with your car accident. You're still recovering, and I feel terrible about not being more supportive. That's very kind of you, sweetheart, I said, playing my part perfectly, while the tiny recording device taped to my chest captured every word. Why don't I come over tomorrow and make you dinner? Like when I was little, remember? We can spend some quality time together, just the two of us. Just the two of us. Perfect for murder, in other words. That sounds wonderful, Rachel. I'd love that. Great. I'll come by around 6. I'll bring groceries and cook your favorite meal, that chicken casserole you used to make for me when I was sick. The irony was almost too much. She was going to poison me with a meal that represented maternal comfort and care. If I weren't wearing a wire for the police, I might have laughed at the twisted symbolism. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I could see unmarked police cars positioned strategically around my neighborhood, and I knew Detective Santos was monitoring my wire from a van parked 3 blocks away. Medical personnel were standing by at the local hospital, ready to pump my stomach or provide whatever emergency care might be needed. Rachel arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying grocery bags and wearing the brightest smile I'd seen on her face in weeks. She looked like a woman without a care in the world, not someone planning to commit matricide before dessert. You look tired, Mom, she said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold against my skin. Have you been sleeping okay since the accident? Not really, I admitted, which was true enough. I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt. Well, you're safe now. That's what matters. She bustled into the kitchen, unpacking ingredients with the efficiency of someone who'd planned this meal very carefully. Why don't you relax in the living room while I cook? I want to pamper you tonight. I settled into my favorite armchair, watching through the kitchen doorway as Rachel prepared what she intended to be my last meal. She moved confidently, seasoning the chicken, chopping vegetables, boiling noodles. Everything looked normal, domestic, loving, until she thought I wasn't looking. I caught the moment in my peripheral vision, Rachel opening her purse and pulling out a small prescription bottle. She glanced toward the living room, confirming I was distracted by the television, then quickly shook several pills into her palm. With practiced movements, she crushed the pills with the flat side of a knife and stirred the powder into the casserole. Potassium supplements, just like she'd discussed with Brad on the surveillance footage. Dinner's almost ready, she called out cheerfully, as if she hadn't just seasoned my food with enough medication to stop my heart. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. The wire was recording everything. The police were listening. I just had to survive the next hour without actually eating enough poisoned casserole to kill me. Rachel brought me a plate piled high with chicken, noodles, and vegetables. It looked delicious, perfectly normal, exactly like the comfort food she'd promised. She settled into the chair across from me with her own plate, which I noticed contained significantly less food than mine. This looks wonderful, sweetheart, I said, taking a small forkful and moving it toward my mouth. I made it with extra love, she replied, watching me intently. Extra love, extra potassium. Same thing apparently in Rachel's twisted mind. I pretended to eat, moving food around on my plate, taking tiny bites and chewing carefully before spitting them into my napkin when she wasn't looking. It was a delicate dance, appearing to consume the meal while actually avoiding the poison. After 20 minutes, Rachel started looking concerned. You're not eating much, Mom. Is something wrong with the casserole? It's delicious, honey. I guess I'm just not as hungry as I thought. But you need to keep your strength up, especially after the accident. Here, let me heat this up for you. Sometimes food tastes better when it's really hot. She took my plate back to the kitchen, and I heard the microwave running. When she returned, the casserole was steaming, and she'd added an extra helping. There, that should be much better. This time, she didn't leave me alone. She sat directly across from me, watching every bite, encouraging me to eat more, commenting on how much better I looked already. The attention was suffocating, maternal, and absolutely terrifying. I managed to eat about a quarter of the poisoned food, enough to make me sick, but hopefully not enough to kill me, before I started feeling the effects. My heart began racing, my vision blurred slightly, and my hands developed a tremor I couldn't control. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel asked, but there was excitement in her voice rather than concern. "I feel strange," I said, which wasn't acting anymore. "Dizzy, like my heart is beating too fast." "Maybe you should lie down," she suggested, standing quickly. "Here, let me help you to the bedroom." But instead of helping me, she stepped back and watched as I struggled to stand on increasingly unsteady legs. She was studying me like a scientist observing a lab rat, taking mental notes on the progression of symptoms. That's when I realized she wasn't planning to call 911. She was going to sit there and watch me die, probably coaching me through my final moments with fake comfort while secretly celebrating her victory. My daughter was a monster, and I was about to give her exactly what she deserved. "Butterfly," I whispered, just loud enough for the wire to pick up. The word had barely left my lips when everything happened at once. My front door exploded inward as police officers stormed into the house, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Detective Santos burst through the kitchen door, followed by paramedics who immediately surrounded me with emergency equipment. Rachel's face went through an entire spectrum of emotions in about 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, realization, and finally, pure rage. "What is this?" she screamed, backing against the wall as officers moved to restrain her. "What's happening? Mom, what did you do?" "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Detective Santos said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane. I was taking care of my mother. She's having some kind of medical emergency." But even as she protested, the paramedics were testing my blood pressure, checking my pulse, and preparing to transport me to the hospital. My heart was racing dangerously fast, and my body was struggling to process the potassium overload I deliberately consumed. "We'll need to pump her stomach," one of the paramedics said, "and get her on cardiac monitoring immediately." "No!" Rachel shouted, fighting against the handcuffs. "You don't understand. She's confused. She's paranoid. She's been acting strange since Dad died." Detective Santos held up her phone, which had been recording Rachel's voice through my wire. "Ma'am, we have you on tape discussing murder methods with your husband. We have video footage of you breaking into your mother's house multiple times. And we just watched you poison her food with crushed potassium supplements." The fight went out of Rachel all at once. She slumped against the wall, her face pale and slack with shock. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," I said, my voice hoarse but stronger than I felt. "Long enough to see exactly what kind of person you really are." As the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, I caught Rachel's eye one last time. "Your father would be ashamed of you," I said. "He loved you so much. And this is how you honor his memory? By trying to murder the woman he spent his life protecting?" Rachel started crying then. Not tears of remorse, but tears of rage and frustration. She was crying because she'd been caught, not because she regretted what she'd tried to do. "You don't understand," she sobbed as the officers led her toward the door. "You don't understand what it's like, watching you sit on all that money while we struggle. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right." "Murder is never right," Detective Santos said firmly. "And $30 million is never worth your mother's life." "It would have been quick," Rachel said, looking directly at me. "I would have made it quick and painless. That's more mercy than you showed me, making me beg for money that should have been mine anyway." The casual way she discussed my planned murder, as if she were explaining a business decision, chilled me to the bone. This wasn't my daughter speaking anymore. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone whose love for money had completely consumed whatever love she'd once had for me. At the hospital, doctors worked for 3 hours to stabilize my heart rhythm and flush the excess potassium from my system. I'd come closer to dying than I'd expected, close enough that the doctors were amazed I'd survived without permanent damage. "You're very lucky," Dr. Peterson told me as I recovered in the cardiac unit. "A few more bites of that food, and we might not have been able to save you." Lucky. There was that word again. But this time, I knew it wasn't luck that had saved me. It was preparation, courage, and the help of people who cared more about justice than family loyalty. Detective Santos visited me the next morning with an update on Rachel's case. "She's confessed to everything," she said, settling into the visitor's chair beside my bed. "The brake tampering, the break-ins, the poisoning. Her husband Brad is trying to claim he was coerced, but we have him on video discussing murder methods. They're both looking at 25 to life. 25 to life. My daughter would spend the rest of her existence in prison, and she'd put herself there through her own greed and cruelty. How do you feel about that?" Detective Santos asked gently. I thought about it for a long moment. "Sad," I said finally, "but not sorry. She made her choice, and now she has to live with the consequences. Any regrets about how you handled this?" "Only one," I said. "I regret that it took me so long to see who she really was. But that was behind me now. Rachel was going to prison. Brad was facing his own charges, and I was finally free to live my life without fear. $30 million was a lot of money, but my life, my real life, the one where I could sleep peacefully without worrying about being murdered in my bed, was priceless." The trial was a media sensation. "Daughter tries to murder mother for $30 million inheritance" ran as headlines across the country, and reporters camped outside the courthouse every day for 3 weeks. I became an unwilling celebrity, the grandmother who'd outsmarted her murderous daughter with hidden cameras and police cooperation. Rachel's defense attorney tried to paint her as a desperate mother driven to extremes by financial pressure. He talked about Brad's failed businesses, Tyler's college expenses, the crushing weight of debt that had made them do terrible things. But the prosecution had hours of video footage showing Rachel coldly planning my death, and my testimony about the brake tampering sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, breaking and entering, and criminal endangerment. Brad received a similar sentence, though his cooperation with prosecutors earned him a slightly reduced term. Throughout the trial, Rachel never looked at me directly. She sat at the defendant's table with perfect posture. Dressed in conservative clothes her lawyer had chosen to make her look sympathetic, but I could see the anger radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She was furious at being caught, not remorseful about what she'd done. Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson, was in the courtroom for the sentencing. He'd been living with Brad's parents since his parents' arrest, and he looked lost, confused, and heartbroken. When the judge sentenced Rachel to 27 years in prison, Tyler started crying silently. After the sentencing, I approached him in the hallway. "Tyler, honey," I said gently, "I know this is incredibly hard for you." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes that reminded me painfully of Rachel at the same age. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about what Mom tried to do to you." "You have nothing to apologize for," I said firmly. "None of this was your fault. But I knew they were having money problems. I heard them fighting about it. If I had said something, maybe nothing would have changed, except that you would have been in danger too," I interrupted. "Your mother made her choices, Tyler. You didn't make them for her." He hugged me then, this tall, gangly teenager who'd lost both parents to greed and stupidity. We stood in the courthouse hallway, holding each other while reporters snapped pictures and his paternal grandparents waited patiently nearby. "What happens now?" he asked when we finally separated. "Now you focus on finishing high school and figuring out what you want to do with your life," I said. "And you know that college is taken care of. Your grandfather Robert set up an education fund for you years ago. It's separate from everything that happened with your parents." Tyler's face showed the first spark of hope I'd seen since the trial began. "Really? Really? Your grandfather loved you, honey. He wanted to make sure you had opportunities, no matter what." 6 months after the trial ended, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I established a foundation in Robert's name, dedicating $25 million to supporting seniors who were being financially abused by their own family members. The remaining $5 million was more than enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The Robert Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection provided legal assistance, counseling services, and safe housing for older adults whose children or grandchildren were stealing from them, manipulating them, or worse. It turned out to be a more common problem than I'd ever imagined. Detective Santos, who'd become a friend during the investigation, helped me understand the scope of the issue. Elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, she explained over coffee one afternoon. And family members are the perpetrators in about 60% of cases. What Rachel did to you wasn't unusual, Maggie. It was just unusually well documented. The Foundation's first client was a 73-year-old woman named Dorothy, whose son had been forging her signature on checks and slowly draining her life savings. Her story was heartbreakingly similar to mine, except that Dorothy didn't have hidden cameras or $30 million to protect herself with. I never thought my own son would steal from me, she told me during our first meeting. I raised him. I loved him. I trusted him completely. How could he do this to me? It was the same question I'd asked myself about Rachel 100 times. The answer was always the same. Some people value money more than love, and blood relation doesn't protect you from that kind of cruelty. But helping other victims helped heal something in me that I didn't even know was broken. Every senior citizen we helped, every family member we prosecuted, every dollar we recovered, it all felt like justice not just for them, but for Robert, for me, and for every parent who'd ever been betrayed by their own child. Tyler graduated high school with honors and started college that fall, majoring in criminal justice. He said he wanted to work in law enforcement someday, to help people like his grandmother who'd been victimized by people they trusted. I want to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, he told me at his graduation party. Looking at him, this smart, compassionate young man who'd emerged from such a terrible family situation with his integrity intact, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not gratitude for what Rachel had done, but gratitude for what her actions had revealed. They'd shown me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could survive betrayal and fight back against injustice. They'd led me to a purpose that gave meaning to Robert's legacy and my own life, and they'd proven that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all. It's the knowledge that you have the courage to protect what matters most. 2 years after Rachel's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear from the daughter who'd tried to murder me, but curiosity finally won over caution. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten in the careful script Rachel had perfected in Catholic school. She talked about her life in prison, her cellmate who was teaching her to paint, the classes she was taking to earn her bachelor's degree. For 4.5 pages, she sounded almost like the daughter I remembered from before greed had poisoned her heart. But the last paragraph revealed that prison hadn't changed her as much as I'd hoped. I know you probably think I'm a terrible person, she wrote, but I want you to understand that everything I did came from love. Love for my family, love for my son, fear of losing everything we'd worked so hard to build. Maybe my methods were wrong, but my intentions came from the right place. I hope someday you can forgive me and we can have some kind of relationship again. Tyler needs both of us in his life. Love. She was still calling it love, this thing that had driven her to sabotage my car and poison my food. Even after 2 years in prison, Rachel couldn't acknowledge that what she'd done was pure selfishness disguised as family devotion. I never wrote back. Tyler, on the other hand, had become the light of my life. He visited every few weeks, bringing laundry and stories from college, letting me cook for him and fuss over his grades. He'd grown into a fine young man despite everything his parents had put him through, and I was prouder of him than I had words to express. Mom writes to me sometimes, he told me one Sunday afternoon as we worked in my garden together. She keeps asking me to visit her. Do you want to? I asked carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. I don't know. Part of me misses her, you know. She's still my mom, even after everything. But another part of me is angry that she chose money over family, over you. You don't have to decide right now, I said. Or ever. If you don't want to. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. What would Grandpa Robert have done? Tyler asked. I considered the question seriously. Robert had been a forgiving man, but he'd also been practical about protecting the people he loved. I think he would have said that forgiveness doesn't require putting yourself in danger, I said finally. You can forgive your mother without having a relationship with her. You can wish her well without trusting her again. Tyler nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, planting tomatoes and peppers in the raised beds Robert had built for me before his diagnosis. "Grandma?" Tyler said eventually. "Thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For fighting back, for not letting her get away with it, for showing me that family doesn't mean you have to accept being treated badly." Those words meant more to me than all the money in Robert's accounts combined. The Robert Sullivan Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped over 300 seniors in 2 years, recovered more than $8 million in stolen funds, and sent 47 family members to prison for elder abuse. The statistics were impressive, but the individual stories were what kept me motivated. Like Margaret Thompson, whose daughter had been slowly poisoning her with insulin to cause diabetic episodes that would eventually kill her. Or Frank Rodriguez, whose son had been selling his father's possessions on eBay while telling him that he'd simply misplaced them. Or Helen Chang, whose grandson had convinced her to sign over her house deed by claiming it was a Medicare form. Each case reminded me that what Rachel had done wasn't unique. It was part of a larger epidemic of children who saw their aging parents as obstacles to inheritance rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. But for every horror story, there was also a victory. Every family member we prosecuted, every dollar we recovered, every senior citizen we helped protect, it all felt like redemption. Not just for the victims, but for me as well. I'd started this journey as a grief-stricken widow who'd been betrayed by her only child. I'd ended it as a fighter, an advocate, and a protector of people who couldn't always protect themselves. Now, at 69 years old, I wake up every morning with purpose. I have work that matters, relationships that nourish me, and the satisfaction of knowing that Robert's money is being used to honor his memory in the best possible way. Rachel sits in prison, counting down the years until parole. Brad serves his sentence in a different facility, apparently spending his time writing letters to parole boards that no one reads. Their son Tyler has grown into a man they barely know, shaped by their absence more than their presence. Sometimes, I wonder if things could have been different. If I'd said yes to Rachel's initial demand for $25 million, would we still be a family? Would she have been satisfied, or would she have found new ways to manipulate and control me? I'll never know for sure, but I suspect the money was never really the point. The money was just the excuse Rachel used to justify behavior that came from somewhere much darker, a place where love was conditional, family was transactional, and other people existed primarily to serve her needs. My late husband Robert had left me $30 million and a daughter who tried to kill me for it. In the end, I kept the money and lost the daughter. But what I gained was far more valuable. The knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, braver than I'd ever needed to be, and capable of protecting not just myself, but others who needed protection. If you're watching this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you're being pressured by family members who see your assets as their inheritance, know that you're not alone. There are people who will help you, laws that will protect you, and options you might not have considered. And if you're watching this story and you recognize someone else in it, a parent or grandparent who might be vulnerable to this kind of abuse, please pay attention. Love shouldn't cost everything you own, and family shouldn't require you to sacrifice your safety or your independence. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it. And now, every day, I use that knowledge to make sure other people don't have to learn it the same way I did. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it's worth the wait. Now, I'm curious about you who are watching my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. I found the address hidden inside an old birthday card from someone named Sarah in my husband's desk drawer. That's when I knew 35 years of marriage was about to implode. I called my lawyer before I called David, and when I finally drove to that farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, I brought my phone fully charged and my backbone finally intact. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me backtrack so you understand how a reasonably intelligent 63-year-old woman ends up playing detective in her own marriage. For 8 years, David had been sending money to his sister Sarah in the countryside. $500 every single month like clockwork. When I'd asked about her early on, he'd gotten that patient tone men use when they think you're being silly. She's had a hard life, Maggie. Lost her husband young, raising her daughter alone. Family helps family. I'd felt guilty for even questioning it. David came from a big family, scattered across 3 states. I'd only met a handful of them at our wedding decades ago. It seemed reasonable that he'd want to help a struggling sister. The business trip started about 6 years ago. Once a month, sometimes twice, David would drive out to check on Sarah. 4 hours each way, always on a Saturday. She needs help with the property, he'd explain. Repairs, that sort of thing. When I suggested joining him, meet this sister I'd been helping support, David always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. Sarah was shy. The house was too small for guests. She was going through a difficult period and wasn't up for meeting new people. After a while, I stopped asking. How considerate of me, right? Making things easy for my husband's double life. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I deliberately ignored. The way he'd shower immediately after returning from his trips. How he kept his phone face down on the table. The smell of unfamiliar laundry detergent on his clothes occasionally. David had always handled our finances. I'm the lawyer. Let me deal with the boring stuff, he'd say whenever I asked about our accounts. I had access to one checking account for groceries and household expenses. But the investment accounts, retirement funds, his business accounts? Those were too complicated for me to worry about. I'd trusted him completely. What a fool I'd been. But it was the birthday card that changed everything. I'd been looking for our property tax documents when I found it shoved in the back of his desk drawer. The envelope was addressed to David in looping feminine handwriting. Inside, the card showed a sunset over a lake. The message read, "Happy birthday to someone special. Thank you for everything you do for us. With love, Sarah and Emma." Emma. He'd never mentioned Sarah having a daughter named Emma. I photographed the return address with shaking hands, then carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. That night over dinner, I asked casually, "How's your sister Sarah doing?" David didn't even look up from his pot roast. "Fine, same as always." "And her daughter? What was her name again?" The brief pause was almost imperceptible. "Lisa. Her name's Lisa." He'd forgotten his own lie. I spent the next 3 days being the perfect wife while my mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Sarah had 2 daughters. Maybe I'd misread the card. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But I'd been married long enough to know the weight of a lie. It sits differently in the air between 2 people. On Thursday morning, after David left for work, I got in my car and started driving west toward that address in rural Pennsylvania. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd arrived to find exactly what David had described. A struggling sister grateful for family support. The 4-hour drive gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I'd say. I'd be friendly, introduce myself as David's wife, laugh about never having met after all these years. We'd have coffee. I'd meet Emma or Lisa or whoever the daughter was. Everything would make sense. The countryside grew more remote as I drove, farms giving way to long stretches of forest. My GPS eventually directed me down a dirt road, then onto an even narrower lane. The house appeared suddenly around a bend. A small but well-maintained farmhouse with blue shutters and flower boxes under the windows. This wasn't the struggling property David had described. The lawn was manicured. Fresh paint gleamed on the porch. Apparently, poverty looks different when you're spending someone else's money. And in the driveway sat David's car. It was only 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. David was supposed to be at his office in Philadelphia reviewing contracts. Yet there was his silver Lexus, parked at an angle in the gravel driveway, as if he'd been in a hurry to get inside. I pulled my car off the narrow lane about 50 yards back, partially hidden behind an overgrown hedge. My hands trembled as I cut the engine. For several long minutes, I just sat there, staring at that cheerful blue house with its welcoming flower boxes, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with 8 years of supposed charity. The property sprawled across several acres. Behind the house, I could see a newer barn structure and what looked like a chicken coop. A wooden swing set stood in the side yard, the kind you'd spend $1,500 on from a specialty store. Not exactly the image of desperate poverty David had painted. I'd brought binoculars. Another thing I never imagined doing at 63. Sitting in my car like some private investigator from a bad movie. Through the lenses, I could see more details. Solar panels on the roof, a greenhouse attached to the barn, a late-model SUV parked beside David's Lexus. The front door opened. I held my breath. A woman emerged, young enough to be my daughter, maybe 35 at most, with long auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a fitted sweater that showed off a figure that definitely wasn't 63. She walked to the SUV, retrieved something from the back, then turned and smiled at someone inside the house. David appeared in the doorway. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not a brotherly peck on the cheek, a real kiss, the kind that told a story of familiarity and intimacy. My chest constricted so tightly I thought I might be having a heart attack. The binoculars slipped from my shaking hands, clattering against the steering wheel. This was no sister. Whatever David had been doing for 8 years, it had nothing to do with family charity. I watched them disappear back inside the house, his arm around her waist in a gesture of casual possession. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with my shattered assumptions and the terrible knowledge growing in my gut. Part of me wanted to storm up that driveway, pound on that door, demand explanations. But a stronger instinct held me frozen in place. I needed to see more, understand more, before I made any moves. I'd read once that the wife is always the last to know. I'd felt smugly certain that would never be me. I'd considered myself observant, attuned to my husband's moods and patterns. Yet here I was, the cliché I'd pitied in other women. About 20 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, a little girl came running out. She looked about 7, with dark, curly hair and David's exact nose. David's nose. My vision tunneled. The little girl was carrying a baseball mitt and laughing as David chased after her, scooping her up and spinning her around. Her delighted squeals carried across the distance. The young woman stood on the porch, watching them with a smile that spoke of 1,000 similar moments. This wasn't an affair. This was a life. A whole separate life David had built while I'd been home in Philadelphia, believing in family charity and business trips. The girl wrapped her arms around David's neck. He carried her toward the barn, speaking to her with animated gestures. Everything about his body language screamed comfort, belonging, love. I'd been married to this man for 35 years. We'd raised 2 sons together. We'd buried both his parents and mine. I'd held his hand through his father's funeral and celebrated every promotion, every milestone. And apparently, for at least 8 years, I'd been sharing him with an entire other family. The implications crashed over me in waves. The money, obviously, was just the start. How many lies had he told? How many late nights at the office had been spent here? How many business conferences had been long weekends with them? My phone buzzed. A text from David. Working lunch with clients. Will be home by 6. Love you. The casualness of the lie took my breath away. Love you. As if those words meant anything when they came from a man who was, at that very moment, playing father to a child I'd never known existed. I sat in that car for 3 hours, watching David live his other life. The little girl whose name I didn't know. The woman who smiled at him with the easy familiarity of years, not months. The way he'd kneel down to tie the child's shoe, patient and attentive in a way I'd forgotten he could be. Our own sons had left home over a decade ago. Michael was in Seattle with his own family. James had moved to London for work. David had seemed content with our empty nest, never expressing any desire for grandchildren beyond polite interest when the boys called. Yet here he was, fully engaged with this child who couldn't be his granddaughter. Not unless the math made sense, and from where I sat, nothing about this situation made any sense at all. Around 2 in the afternoon, they all went back inside. I waited another agonizing 30 minutes, then made a decision. I couldn't sit in this car forever, and I needed answers more than I needed to protect myself from the truth. The walk to the front door felt like crossing a battlefield. Each step on that gravel driveway crunched too loudly in the afternoon silence. The flower boxes I'd noticed earlier were full of chrysanthemums, the kind David always said were too much work for our own garden. I raised my hand to knock, then paused. Through the window beside the door, I could see into the living room. David sat on a comfortable-looking sofa, The little girl curled against his side. He was reading to her from a large picture book, his voice carrying that gentle tone I remembered from when our boys were small. The young woman, his supposed sister Sarah, came in carrying a tray with what looked like hot chocolate and cookies. She set it down, ruffled the child's hair, and kissed the top of David's head before settling in beside them. It was such a domestic scene, so perfectly ordinary, that it felt obscene. This was someone's family, someone's normal afternoon. The problem was, David already had a family. He had me, though apparently I was the discount version he kept in the closet. I knocked before I could change my mind. The sound seemed to shatter the peaceful tableau. Through the window, I watched David's head snap up, his expression shifting from relaxed contentment to alarm in an instant. The door opened. The young woman stood there, still smiling, clearly expecting a neighbor or delivery person. Her smile faltered when she saw me, an unfamiliar older woman on her porch. "Can I help you?" Her voice was pleasant, genuinely curious. "I'm looking for Sarah," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm Maggie Sullivan, David's wife." The color drained from her face. Behind her, I heard David's sharp intake of breath, followed by rapid footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of panic that would have been comical if it wasn't destroying my entire world. "Maggie, what are you doing here?" "I found your birthday card," I said simply. "From Sarah and Emma." The young woman, still standing frozen in front of me, made a small sound. Not Sarah, then. Her name was something else, and she just realized that the lie had unraveled. "It's not what you think," David started, which might be the most cliched sentence ever uttered by a caught man. "Really?" I kept my voice pleasant, almost conversational. Years of corporate work had taught me that the quieter you speak, the more people have to lean in to hear you. And I wanted them to hear every word. Because what I think is that for 8 years, you've been sending $500 a month to someone who isn't your sister. What I think is that you've been lying to me every single time you drove out here for your supposed charity visits. What I think is that little girl in there has your nose, your eyes, and probably your DNA. The young woman started crying silently, tears streaming down her face. David looked like he might be sick. "Maggie, please, let me explain. Can we go somewhere and talk?" "Oh, I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not until I understand exactly what I'm looking at. So why don't we start with the truth? What's your real name?" I asked the woman. "Nicole," she whispered. "Nicole Peterson." "And the little girl?" "Emma?" Nicole nodded, unable to speak. "Is David her father?" Nicole's yes was barely audible, but it detonated like a bomb in the quiet afternoon. David's face crumbled. All his usual confidence, that take-charge attitude he'd cultivated over decades in corporate law, vanished. He looked old suddenly, older than his 65 years. "How long?" My voice remained eerily calm. Some distant part of my brain noted this with interest. Shouldn't I be screaming, throwing things? Instead, I felt ice-cold and crystalline clear. "Maggie, please!" David reached for my arm. I stepped back as if he'd tried to strike me. "Don't touch me." Each word came out precisely measured. "How long has this been going on?" Nicole wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 9 years. We met 9 years ago. 9 years. Emma was 7, which meant Nicole had gotten pregnant about 2 years into whatever this was. 2 years during which David had apparently decided he wanted a do-over at family life. "I'd like to come inside," I said. "Unless you'd prefer the neighbors hear this conversation?" Nicole stepped aside wordlessly. David looked like he wanted to protest, but thought better of it. I walked into my husband's other home, taking in details with a strange, detached fascination. Family photos covered the mantel above the fireplace. David and Nicole on a beach somewhere, both laughing. Emma as a baby, David cradling her with the same tender expression he'd worn with our own sons. The 3 of them at what looked like a pumpkin patch, all wearing matching plaid shirts. A whole history I knew nothing about, documented in frames that cost more than the $500 monthly I'd thought was charity. Emma appeared in the doorway connecting to the kitchen, still holding her picture book. She looked between the adults with the worried expression children get when they sense tension but don't understand it. "Mom? Who's this lady?" "Mom." Nicole was Mom. And David was what? I looked at him, waiting to see how he'd navigate this particular minefield. Emma, honey, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Nicole's voice shook. Grown-ups need to talk. But Dad was reading me the story. Dad? Of course he was Dad. Why wouldn't he be? He'd been there for birthdays and bedtime stories, for scraped knees, and probably first days of school. Just not for our sons' weddings or the birth of our actual grandchildren in Seattle. I'll finish it later, sweetheart, David said quietly. His eyes were red. Good. I hoped it hurt. Emma left reluctantly, casting one more confused glance at me. I waited until I heard a door close somewhere upstairs. So, I said, settling into an armchair that had probably cost 5 monthly payments. Let me see if I understand. 9 years ago, you met Nicole. You started an affair. She got pregnant. And instead of, I don't know, divorcing me or being honest, you decided to maintain 2 families? It wasn't like that, David protested weakly. Then please, enlighten me. What was it like? I settled back in my chair. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been playing house with a woman young enough to be our daughter while I've been home budgeting our tight finances. But I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation that doesn't make you a lying, cheating fraud. Nicole spoke up, her voice steadier now. I didn't know he was married. Not at first. That surprised me enough to look at her directly. She met my eyes, and I saw genuine anguish there. I met David at a farmer's market in town. He said he was recently divorced, working through it. We started seeing each other. By the time I found out the truth, I was already pregnant. And you stayed anyway, I observed. He said he was going to leave you, that he just needed time to figure things out financially to tell you the right way. Nicole's laugh was bitter. I believed him for longer than I should have. But you're still here. He's still here. And I'm still very much married to him. Silence fell heavy in the room. David stood near the window, his back to both of us, shoulders slumped in defeat. The $500 a month, I said. That wasn't the real number, was it? More silence. David, I'm not leaving here without answers. How much? 2,000. His voice was barely audible. Sometimes more, depending on what was needed. $2,000 a month for 8 years. Nearly $200,000 funneled into this second life while I'd been carefully budgeting our retirement accounts. The numbers kept running through my head as I sat in that living room, watching my husband's double life crystallize into cold, hard financial reality. 2,000 monthly payments meant $192,000 over 8 years. But that wouldn't be everything, would it? I want to see the full accounting, I said. Every penny you've spent on this situation. And I want to see it now. David turned from the window, his face a mixture of resignation and something that might have been relief. There's a ledger upstairs in my office. Your office. I almost laughed. Of course you have an office here. Why wouldn't you? It's practically your primary residence. Maggie, please, show me the ledger, David. Unless you'd prefer I start calling lawyers right now. I pulled my phone from my purse, letting it rest pointedly on my knee. He climbed the stairs like a man heading to the gallows. Nicole and I sat in excruciating silence, 2 women whose lives had collided in the worst possible way. She was younger than our son, Michael. That thought made my stomach turn. Did you love him? I asked, surprising myself. Nicole looked up, tears still tracking down her face. I thought I did. Maybe I still do. But I'm tired of being the secret. Emma deserves better than a father who only shows up when his other life permits. How often does he come here? 3, sometimes 4 times a month, weekends mostly. Sometimes he'd take vacation days, tell you he was at a conference. Every vacation day for the past 8 years suddenly took on new meaning. The legal conference in Pittsburgh that ran long, the training seminar in Harrisburg. All lies, all time spent here, building this parallel existence. David returned with a black leather binder. He set it on the coffee table like it might explode. I opened it, forcing myself to read each entry methodically. The monthly payments were there, documented with the kind of precision David brought to all his financial matters. But there was so much more. The down payment on this house, $50,000. Renovations, $32,000. The SUV in the driveway, $40,000 paid in full. Medical bills for Emma's birth, $12,000. Furniture, appliances, Emma's private school tuition, gymnastics lessons, summer camps. By the time I reached the final page, the total made me physically ill. $378,000. My voice was flat. You've diverted nearly $400,000 of our money into this. It was my money too, David said weakly. Money from your salary? Your bonuses? I felt a cold realization settling over me. Or is there more you're not telling me? Because these numbers don't add up to just skimming from joint accounts, David. His silence told me everything. We had a joint account for household expenses, a joint retirement fund. You took out a second mortgage on our house last year. Do you remember what you told me that was for? His silence answered for him. You said it was for tax purposes, restructuring for better rates. I laughed, a harsh sound that had no humor in it. I signed those papers trusting you. My name is on that mortgage, David. My credit, my liability. Nicole's face had gone white. You took out a mortgage? The barn, David admitted. The solar panels. Emma's education fund. I wanted to make sure she had everything. With money stolen from your actual wife. Nicole's voice shook with fury. You told me that money came from your bonuses, from investments. Jesus, David. You made me complicit in stealing from her. Nobody stole anything, David protested. But even he didn't sound convinced. I closed the ledger with deliberate care. I think we're done here. For now. David, you're going to go home, pack a bag, and find somewhere else to stay. Not here, I added, seeing Nicole's alarmed expression. I imagine Nicole has some thinking to do about whether she wants to continue being involved with a man who's lied to everyone in his life. Maggie, we need to talk about this rationally. Rationally? I stood up, gripping my purse. You want rational? Here's rational. I'm 63 years old and I've just discovered my husband has a 7-year-old daughter and a whole second family. You've stolen nearly $400,000. You've put our house at risk. You've lied to me for 9 years. There is nothing rational about any of this, David. I never meant to hurt you. Then you should have divorced me. The words came out harder than I intended. That's what honest people do when they want to be with someone else. They end one relationship before starting another. They don't build elaborate lies and secret lives. I walked toward the door, then paused. Nicole, I'm sorry you were dragged into this. I believe you when you say you didn't know, but you know now. I'd think carefully about what kind of man keeps a woman and child hidden away like a shameful secret for 8 years. I made it approximately 15 miles before I had to pull over. The shaking started in my hands and spread through my entire body until I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. 8 years. No, 9 years. An entire decade of deception. After I could breathe again, I did what any self-respecting scorned wife would do. I called my attorney's emergency line. Gerald Fisher had handled our estate planning 5 years earlier. He was thorough, discreet, and expensive. Right now, I needed all three. Maggie, everything all right? I need to file for divorce, immediately, and I need to freeze all joint accounts before my husband cleans them out. The pause on the other end told me Gerald was shifting into crisis mode. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning first thing? I'll be there at 8. And Maggie, don't discuss anything with David. Not finances, not property, nothing. If he calls, tell him your attorney has advised you not to speak with him. I hung up and stared at my phone. One text from David. Please, can we talk about this like adults? Like adults. The man who'd maintained 2 families wanted to discuss adult behavior. I didn't respond. Instead, I called our bank and put a freeze on all withdrawals above $500 from our joint accounts. It would buy me a day, maybe 2, before David realized what I'd done. Then, I drove to our house in Philadelphia, the house we'd lived in for 28 years, the house that apparently had a second mortgage I'd unwittingly co-signed. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt like a museum to a life that had never really existed. I called Michael first. It was early morning in Seattle, but this couldn't wait. Mom, everything okay? No, honey, nothing's okay. I need to tell you something about your father. My voice cracked. Can you get James on a 3-way call? You both need to hear this. 10 minutes later, I told them everything. The silence on the line was deafening. I'm flying out tomorrow, Michael said finally, his voice tight with rage. Me too, James added. Mom, are you safe? Do you need us to come tonight? I'm safe. Your father is the one who should be worried. I looked around at the house that no longer felt like home. Come when you can. We'll figure this out together. After we hung up, I started packing David's belongings. not out of drama or revenge, though there was certainly some satisfaction in it. No, I packed his things because Gerald had said not to discuss anything, and I wanted David's belongings out of my space before I said something I'd regret. By 10 that evening, 12 garbage bags sat in the garage. I'd also found 3 more burner phones hidden in various drawers, each containing texts and photos that confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete alternate reality. David arrived home at 10:47. I know because I was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, watching the headlights sweep across the front windows. He came in quietly, like a man expecting an ambush. "Your things are in the garage," I said before he could speak. "I've booked you a room at the Marriott on Market Street for the next 2 weeks. After that, you'll need to find more permanent arrangements. Maggie, please. My attorney has advised me not to discuss anything with you. All communication goes through him from this point forward. This is insane. We've been married for 35 years. I took a sip of wine, meeting his eyes over the rim of the glass. Apparently not as exclusively as I thought. I made mistakes. I know that. But throwing away 35 years, you threw them away, I interrupted. The moment you decided a secret family was more appealing than being honest with your wife. I'm just dealing with the aftermath. David slumped into the chair across from me. What do you want? Money? The house? I'll give you whatever you want. What I want is the last 9 years of my life back. Can you give me that? He had no answer. I want the trust back, the honesty, the marriage I thought I had. Can you give me any of those things? More silence. I found the burner phones, all 3 of them, the texts to Nicole, the photos of Emma's birthday parties, her school plays, her first day of 2nd grade. You were living a completely separate life, David. And the worst part? You were good at it. If I hadn't found that birthday card, how much longer would this have gone on? I don't know, he whispered. Would you have told me when Emma graduated high school? College? Or were you planning to maintain this charade until one of us died? Something in my voice must have finally broken through his defenses. David buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs that might have moved me once. Before I knew he'd spent our retirement savings on another woman's child. Get your things and go, I said quietly. We'll let the lawyers handle the rest. He left without another word. I heard the garage door open, the sound of bags being loaded into his car, then the engine starting. I sat in that living room until long after his taillights disappeared, finishing my wine and planning exactly how I was going to dismantle the life he'd built on lies. And somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, Nicole was probably having similar thoughts. Gerald Fisher's office smelled like expensive leather and the kind of confidence that comes from winning. I needed both. He sat across from me, reading through the ledger I'd photographed, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is financial fraud," he said finally. "The second mortgage alone, forged documents showing joint approval when you never actually agreed to the terms he negotiated. That's a felony, Maggie." I signed the papers. My voice was flat. Papers he misrepresented. You thought it was a refinance for better rates. He used it to fund his other family. That's fraud. Gerald set down the documents. We can destroy him, criminally and financially. The words should have felt satisfying. Instead, they just felt heavy. I want what's mine, I said carefully. Everything I'm entitled to under Pennsylvania law. But I also want him to face consequences for what he did. He'll lose his law license. The Bar Association doesn't take kindly to attorneys committing fraud, especially against their own spouses. Gerald's smile was sharp. He'll be unemployable in his field. Good. The vindictive thought surprised me with its intensity. David had built his entire identity around being a successful corporate attorney. Stripping that away felt appropriate somehow. Call it karma, with a law degree. There's more, Gerald said, flipping to another section of notes. I had my investigator run some preliminary checks. Your husband's been moving money, large amounts consistently for the past 3 months. My stomach dropped. Where? Offshore accounts, Cayman Islands specifically. He's been liquidating assets, transferring funds, classic signs of someone preparing to disappear. The betrayal had layers, apparently. David wasn't just maintaining 2 families. He was planning an exit strategy. How much? So far? About $200,000. There's likely more we haven't found yet. $200,000, on top of the $400,000 already spent. David had systematically emptied our life savings while I'd been obliviously planning our retirement. Can we get it back? Some of it. With the fraud charges, we can make a strong case. But international banking laws are tricky. We might recover 60, maybe 70% if we're lucky. I thought about the small apartment I'd probably have to move into, the retirement I'd envisioned, traveling and finally relaxing, evaporating like smoke. Meanwhile, David had been planning to vanish with our money, probably to start fresh somewhere with Nicole and Emma. File everything, I said. Criminal charges, divorce papers, asset freezes, all of it. I want him to know exactly what it feels like to have your life demolished by someone you trusted. Gerald nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking clearly. I'll have the papers ready by Friday. I left his office feeling simultaneously powerful and hollow. Revenge was supposed to feel better than this, wasn't it? My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, then remembered I'd given my number to Nicole before leaving that farmhouse. She'd looked so devastated, so betrayed. We'd exchanged numbers with the understanding that we were both victims of David's deception. Hello? Maggie? It's Nicole. I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know. The urgency in her voice made my pulse quicken. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you meet me? Tomorrow, maybe? There's a coffee shop in Doylestown halfway between us. What's this about, Nicole? Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I found documents. In David's office here. Financial records. Maggie, I think he's planning something bad. Really bad. The coffee shop was one of those carefully curated places designed to look rustic and authentic, all reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. Nicole was already there when I arrived, hunched over a corner table with a manila folder clutched to her chest like a shield. She looked worse than she had 2 days ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook as she pushed a latte toward me that she'd apparently ordered in advance. Thank you for coming, she said. I wasn't sure you would. You said David's planning something. I need to know what. Nicole opened the folder. Inside were printouts of financial statements, emails, and what looked like legal documents. She spread them across the table between us like evidence at a crime scene. After you left, I went through everything in his office. I was so angry, realizing he'd stolen from you, lied to both of us. Her voice cracked. I found these hidden in a locked drawer. I had to break it open. The first document was a new will. David's will, dated 3 weeks ago. I scanned the contents, my stomach churning with each line. He'd left everything to Nicole and Emma. The house in Philadelphia, his life insurance, his retirement accounts, everything. My name appeared exactly once, in a clause specifically stating I was to receive nothing due to irreconcilable differences and financial disagreements. He can't do this, I said, though my legal knowledge was shaky. We're still married. Pennsylvania has spousal protection laws. Keep reading, Nicole whispered. The next document made my blood run cold. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Nicole full control over David's affairs in the event he became incapacitated. Below that, medical records. David had stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis was dated 8 months ago. He's dying, Nicole said unnecessarily. 6 months, maybe less. The doctor said it's aggressive. My mind reeled. David was dying. He'd known for 8 months and never said a word. Not to me. Apparently not to Nicole until recently either, based on her shock. How thoughtful of him to keep us both in suspense. When did you find out? I asked. 3 days ago. He finally told me after you showed up. Said he'd been trying to protect me from the worry. Nicole's laugh was bitter. Protect me? Like I'm some child who can't handle reality. I understood that bitterness intimately. There's more, Nicole continued, pulling out another document. Life insurance policies, 3 of them, total payout of $2 million, all with Emma and me as beneficiaries. He took them out 2 years ago. $2 million. Life insurance that I knew nothing about, purchased with premiums that must have come from our joint accounts. He's been planning this for years, I said slowly, the pieces clicking together. He knew he was sick, probably suspected before the official diagnosis. He set up the will, the insurance, the power of attorney. He was going to die and leave me with nothing while you and Emma got everything. It's worse than that. Nicole pushed across an email chain. Read these. The emails were between David and a financial advisor in the Cayman Islands. They discussed transferring assets, establishing offshore trusts, and timing everything to coincide with the endpoint, David's death. He'd been systematically moving money offshore, planning to die, and let Nicole collect everything while I dealt with the debt and legal mess he'd leave behind. The second mortgage, the credit cards in both our names that he'd maxed out, all of it would become my responsibility while his life insurance paid out to his other family. He was going to frame me, I said, my voice eerily calm. Make it look like I'd been the one mismanaging our finances. Then he'd die, you'd collect millions, and I'd be left with nothing but debt and blame. Nicole nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I swear to you, Maggie, I had no idea about any of this. When I found these documents, I was sick. Literally sick. I threw up in his bathroom. Why are you showing me this? You could have kept quiet, collected the insurance, moved on. Because this is wrong, Nicole said fiercely. I'm not a saint, okay? I slept with a married man. I kept seeing him after I knew the truth. But I'm not a thief. Emma deserves better than money stolen from someone her father betrayed. And you deserve to know what he's been planning. We sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours. 2 women who should have been enemies, united by the same man's elaborate betrayal. Nicole showed me everything she'd found. Bank statements proving David had been draining accounts for years. Investment portfolios liquidated and transferred. There's something else, Nicole said, pulling out another document. He tried to transfer your house. Look at this. It was an attempted quitclaim deed, dated 6 months ago. David had tried to transfer the Philadelphia house to a trust controlled by Nicole. But the signature, my signature, was so obviously forged that even I could see it was fake. He never filed it, Nicole said. I think he knew it wouldn't hold up. The notary stamp is fake too. Look at the date. But he was trying, Maggie. He was trying to take everything from you. More fraud, more felonies. My husband hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd systematically dismantled my entire financial life while I'd trusted him completely. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be completely honest. Did you love him? Nicole was quiet for a long moment. I thought I did. In the beginning, when I believed his lies about being divorced, yes. I loved who I thought he was. She paused, wiping her eyes. I found out he was still married when Emma was 6 months old. A neighbor mentioned seeing his wedding ring tan line. I confronted him. He cried, said he was planning to leave you, that he just needed time to do it right. And like an idiot, I believed him. 7 years, I said quietly. You waited 7 years. Every year he had an excuse. The business wasn't stable enough. Your health was bad, and he couldn't abandon you. His mother was dying. Then it was your mother. Always something. Her voice hardened. But when I found out about the cancer 3 days ago and saw these documents, I realized he was never planning to leave you. He was planning to die and leave me holding stolen money while you got blamed for everything. That's when I understood. He never loved either of us. We were both just convenient. He told me he loved me every day, I said, right up until I found that birthday card. 35 years of I love you, and every single one was a lie by omission. Emma asks about you, Nicole said suddenly. She wanted to know who the sad lady was. I told her you were someone important to her dad. She said you looked like you needed a hug. The unexpected kindness from a child who had no idea she'd been the catalyst for my life's implosion made my throat tight. What will you do? I asked. With the insurance money. I mean, when David dies. I don't want it. Nicole's voice was firm. Not like this. Not money stolen from you. Emma and I will figure something out. I have my job. My parents can help. We'll manage. You'd give up $2 million? I'd give up $2 million stolen through fraud and forgery. Yes. Nicole met my eyes. I made mistakes, huge ones. But I'm not who David tried to make me. I'm not the kind of person who profits from someone else's suffering. An idea was forming in my mind. Dangerous, probably illegal, definitely satisfying. What if there was a way to make this right? I said slowly. Not just right. What if we could make David face everything he's done before he dies? Nicole leaned forward. What are you thinking? He's been planning his death like it's a business transaction. Neat and tidy, with you collecting his insurance while I'm left holding the bag. What if we disrupted that plan? How? I have a very good lawyer. One who's already building a criminal case against David. With these documents, we have proof of fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse. We can file charges now, before he dies. Understanding dawned on Nicole's face. If he's convicted of fraud, the insurance policies won't pay out. The clauses about illegal activity void everything. Exactly. And the offshore accounts? My lawyer can freeze those too. David planned to die a martyr, securing his daughter's future. Instead, he'll die knowing he destroyed everything he tried to protect. That's brutal, Nicole said. Then, after a pause, I'm in. What do you need from me? Testimony, documentation, everything you found. And Nicole? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you. For being honest when you didn't have to be. She squeezed back. Thank you for not hating me. I wouldn't have blamed you if you did. I did, for about an hour after I left your house. Then I realized you're as much his victim as I am. He lied to both of us, made us both complicit in his schemes without our knowledge. I gathered the documents into a neat pile. But we're not victims anymore. We're witnesses. And we're going to make sure David Sullivan faces consequences for every lie he ever told. Gerald Fisher looked like Christmas had come early when I dropped the folder on his desk 3 days later. He flipped through Nicole's documents with increasing excitement, occasionally letting out soft whistles of appreciation. This is a prosecutor's dream, he said finally. We have him on fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, money laundering, and insurance fraud. He'll die in prison, Maggie, even with cancer. Even if he only lives 6 months, he'll spend them behind bars. The satisfaction I'd expected still didn't materialize. Instead, I felt hollow, watching my husband's life reduced to a list of felonies. There's something else, Gerald said, his tone shifting. My investigator found another account, one even Nicole didn't know about. He slid a bank statement across the desk. I scanned the numbers, then stopped. Read them again, certain I'd misunderstood. That's $3 million, I said slowly. 3.2 million to be exact. Sitting in a Bahamian bank under a corporate shell. Your husband's been siphoning money for at least a decade, Maggie. Gerald pulled out more documents. Here's the interesting part. He inherited money from his uncle 12 years ago, remember? The one in Connecticut? I did remember. David had said it was about $50,000, hardly worth mentioning. It was actually $800,000. He told you 50 and pocketed the rest. Then he started using his legal expertise to create offshore entities, moving money through them. A little from his bonuses, a lot from that inheritance, some from careful skimming of joint accounts over the years. He's been building this nest egg systematically. I thought about our lives. How David had always insisted we needed to be careful with money. How he'd vetoed my ideas about renovating the kitchen, taking that trip to Italy I'd dreamed about, helping our sons with down payments on their own homes. All while he was hiding millions in offshore accounts. Turns out, we could have afforded Italy after all. We just couldn't afford David's hobby of maintaining secret families. Can we recover it? With the criminal charges and Nicole's cooperation? Yes, most of it. The courts will order repatriation as part of restitution. It'll take time, but you'll get it back. $3 million. Everything I'd sacrificed, No, we can't afford that, David had fed me. It had all been lies. We'd been wealthy. He'd just been hiding it. File the charges, I said. All of them. Today. Gerald made a call. Things moved quickly after that. Though not as quickly as I'd hoped. Legal processes never do. By the end of the week, federal marshals arrested David at his office. The Bar Association suspended his license pending investigation. His firm issued a terse statement about alleged improprieties and placed him on administrative leave. The preliminary hearings took 3 weeks. David's lawyer pushed for delays, citing his health. We pushed back. Gerald was relentless. I watched it on the evening news, my husband in handcuffs, doing the perp walk past cameras and reporters. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his expensive suits and practiced confidence. Michael and James had flown in by then, sitting on either side of me as we watched their father's public humiliation. Nicole called that night. Emma saw it on TV. She's confused, asking why the police took her daddy. What did you tell her? The truth, age-appropriate version, that he made serious mistakes and has to face consequences. She cried for an hour, guilt twisted in my stomach. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt Emma. I know, and honestly, she needs to learn that actions have consequences, even from people we love. Nicole paused. There's something else. David's lawyer contacted me. He wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? He'll plead guilty to everything, agree to full restitution if we both agree not to testify at trial. He doesn't want Emma watching months of court proceedings. She took a breath. And he's asking for house arrest with hospice care instead of prison. His doctors say he has less than 3 months now. The cancer's spreading fast. The federal prosecutor is willing to agree since he's terminal and a first-time offender, but only if we both consent. What did you say? I said I needed to talk to you first. We're in this together now. I thought about Emma crying over her father's arrest, about David dying alone in a cell versus dying at home, about whether revenge required destroying him completely or if justice could be satisfied another way. Tell his lawyer we'll consider it, I said finally. But I want more than restitution. I want a full accounting of every lie, every dollar, every secret, written and notarized. And I want David to tell our sons the truth himself. Every bit of it. That's fair, Nicole said. I'll let them know. The meeting happened in Gerald's conference room 2 weeks later. David looked terrible, his cancer clearly progressing rapidly despite treatment. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His skin had a grayish tint, and he moved like every step hurt. Part of me felt pity. The larger part remembered $3 million hidden dollars and years of calculated lies. Our sons flanked me on one side of the table. Michael and James had stayed in Philadelphia, taking family leave from their jobs. Both looked shell-shocked, alternating between rage and grief. David sat across from us, his lawyer beside him, Nicole at the far end, a silent witness to this final reckoning. You wanted the truth, David began, his voice raspy. Here it is, all of it. For 2 hours, he talked. About meeting Nicole at a farmer's market 9 years ago. About the affair that became a relationship that became a pregnancy. About deciding he wanted to be a father again, to do it better this time, more present and engaged. About the fear of losing everything if he came clean, so he doubled down on the lies instead. I convinced myself I could manage both lives, he said, that I was providing for everyone. I told myself I was being responsible, protective, but really, I was being a coward. Michael's jaw was clenched so tight I worried he'd crack a tooth. James had tears streaming silently down his face. The money? I prompted. David pulled out a thick document. Every account, every transfer, every dollar. It's all here. $3.4 million total, accumulated over 12 years. I started with Uncle Harold's inheritance, $800,000 that I told you was only $50. I invested it, grew it through careful trading. Then I began moving small amounts from our accounts, from my bonuses. I used my legal knowledge to create offshore structures, hide the movement. He looked at me directly. I told myself it was insurance, security. Then it became my escape fund, my freedom money. But really, it was just greed and cowardice. You stole from your family, Michael said, his voice shaking with rage. While James and I struggled with student loans, while Mom worked part-time at the library to help make ends meet, you were hiding millions? Yes. Why? James's question was barely a whisper. Just tell us why. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was broken. Because I was selfish. Because I wanted what I wanted without consequences. Because I thought I was smarter than everyone else, that I could manage it all. He looked at me directly. Because I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as an obstacle to my happiness. The honesty was brutal. Also, 35 years too late. I have 6 weeks, David continued. Maybe 8 if the treatment works better than expected. I'm pleading guilty to all charges. The restitution agreement returns everything to your mother. The offshore accounts, the house, all of it. Nicole has agreed to sign over any claim to my estate. Emma shouldn't be punished, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. She's 7 years old. She didn't ask for any of this. I want a trust established for her education. $200,000. It's separate from David's estate, funded from the recovered money before distribution. Nicole's eyes widened. Maggie, you don't have to... I know. But Emma is innocent in this, and she's going to grow up knowing her father died a criminal. That's punishment enough. She deserves the chance at a good education, a decent start. David was crying silently. "Thank you," he managed. "I'm not doing it for you," I said coldly. "I'm doing it because it's right." Something you never quite figured out. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. Papers were signed, notarized, filed. David would serve house arrest at a facility with hospice care. The money would be returned. Justice, of a sort, would be served. Michael and James left together, too angry to speak to their father. Nicole gathered her things and gave me one last hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Take care of Emma," I said. "And Nicole? Find someone who deserves you, someone honest." She nodded and left. David remained, waiting to be transported to the facility. We were alone for the first time since everything had unraveled. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't matter now, but I am truly sorry." "You're right," I agreed. "It doesn't matter. Sorry doesn't give me back 35 years. Sorry doesn't erase the humiliation or the betrayal. Sorry is just a word, David, and you've proven that words mean nothing." I walked out of that conference room with my head high, $3 million richer and infinitely lighter without the weight of his lies. Gerald had done the math. After legal fees and restitution, I'd net about $2.8 million, enough to buy a small house somewhere warm, enough to finally take that trip to Italy, enough to help Michael and James buy homes, start the college funds for their kids that David had pretended we couldn't afford. 6 weeks later, I was in Florence when Gerald called to tell me David had died. I was standing in front of Michelangelo's David, the statue, ironically enough. I thanked Gerald for letting me know, ended the call, and went back to admiring the art. I didn't go to the funeral. Neither did Michael or James. Nicole held a small service, she told me later. Just her, Emma, and a few friends. She scattered his ashes in the woods behind the farmhouse. 18 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in San Diego, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Gerald had called that morning with news that the final offshore account had been recovered. The international legal process had been long, expensive, and frustrating, but persistence paid off. My final total, $2.9 million after all legal fees, taxes, and complications. I'd used some of it to furnish this apartment. More went into trusts for my grandchildren. Michael had used his share to pay off his mortgage. James had invested his. Emma's education fund was safely managed by an independent trustee, ready for her college years. The revenge I'd imagined in those first angry days had morphed into something better. Freedom. Freedom from lies, from a man who'd seen me as an accessory rather than a partner. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. My phone buzzed. A text from Nicole, who'd become an unlikely friend. "Emma started 3rd grade today. Sent you a photo." The photo showed a smiling little girl with a backpack almost as big as she was. She had David's nose and Nicole's eyes, and absolutely none of the blame for the chaos her existence had caused. I texted back a heart emoji and a message of congratulations. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on some jazz, and watched the sun sink into the Pacific. Somewhere, David was gone. His lies were exposed. His carefully constructed dual life had collapsed into truth. And me? I was finally, completely, gloriously free. The sunset was beautiful. The wine was excellent. And for the first time in 35 years, my life was entirely, wonderfully my own. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.